Victor is ready. Oh, good. So let us begin with a word of prayer. Lord God, we thank you for the opportunity to be here to study your word. Help us to understand what you tell us through the scriptures, and help us to understand more about the Apostle Paul, who through his work led to us eventually being in this place. We ask this in your name. Amen. Now, last week, Paul had a little difficulty with life. Remember, he had been, if you want to call it that, arrested. So what do you want to call him? The head of the guards there doesn't know what to do. So he sends him to the Sanhedrin. What happened to Paul when he went to the Sanhedrin?
Isn't that where they got beat him up?
Yeah, they basically tried to kill him right there on the floor. So the Roman guards decided to intervene, and by the time Paul was done, do you recall what happened up in the crowd? How he somehow inspired the Pharisees to fight against the Sadducees, and so the guards had to go and stop them too. So things got quite a bit out of hand. Let's put it that way. So then the next question is, the captain of the guard decides to move Paul to Caesarea. Now, why did he decide to do that?
Paul wanted to go before Caesar.
Right. That's right. Paul wanted to exercise his right to go before Caesar. And there was also another reason. He figures anytime there's a riot, it's a black mark on me, so I'll pass him off to the next guy. Mm-hmm. So this would be like a change in venue, in today's terms. So basically, he's going one step up the chain, this Caesarea. We're going to find out about Caesarea in a minute. So basically what Luke is going to tell us in chapter 23, verses 25 to 35. Come on in. That is the letter that they wrote. That is the letter that you're going to read. We're going to read the letter the captain wrote to get off of, out of the hot spot. So would somebody like to read Acts chapter 23, verses 25 to 35?
He wrote a letter as follows: Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews, and they were about to kill him, but I came with my troops and rescued him, for I have learned that he is a Roman citizen. I wanted to know why they were accusing him, so I brought him to their Sanhedrin. I found that the accusation had to do with the question about their law, but there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment. When I was informed of a plot to be carried out against the man, I sent him to you at once. I also ordered his accusers to present to you their case against him. So the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul with them during the night and brought him as far as Antipatris. Mm-hmm. The next day, they let the cavalry go on with him while they returned to the barracks. When the cavalry arrived in Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor and handed Paul over to him. The governor read the letter and asked what province he was from. Learning that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will hear your case when your accusers get here. Then he ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace.
Huh. So now the captain of the guard is saying, I got one less irritant from me. So he is now moved up the chain. Okay. So Governor Felix is reading this letter, and he's probably saying something like, "Oh boy." So now he's trying to figure out what to do. So look at what he says. He says, until your accusers show up, I'm not gonna do anything.
They're good at passing the buck.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, basically, this is a religious thing, and the Romans didn't want any part of this. They were into, here's the law, you break it, so we'll flog you 25 times and make you run on the board. I will not do this anymore. Whatever it is they did, but they're not into this religious stuff because it seems not to go away. Now, there's some things you need to know. The center of Roman government was not in Jerusalem at that time. Like I told you, Jerusalem was considered shall we say, backwater outpost. But it was in Caesarea. So that's where the governor would live. The Praetorium is the residence of the governor, and the Praetorium in Caesarea was a place that had been built by Herod the Great. So that's why it was called Herod's, palace, or Herod's Praetorium. Claudius Lysias wrote his letter. That's the letter we read. He did it absolutely fair and completely impartial, and the party set out. It was 60 miles from Jerusalem to Caesarea, and Antipatris was 25 miles up from Caesarea. Up to Antipatris, the country was dangerous and inhabited by Jews, and after that, the country was open and flat, quite unsuited for any ambush, and largely inhabited by the Gentiles. So, the main body of the army, that's why they returned there and left the cavalry to take them the rest of the way. Now, this guy Felix that's going to hear this, I guess, he's a little bit of a shyster. It says, the governor to whom Paul was taken was Felix, and he was famous. For 5 years he had governed Judea, and for 2 years before that he had been stationed in Samaria. He still had 2 years to go before being dismissed from his post. Now he had begun life as a slave. His brother Pallas was a favorite of Nero. Through the influence of Pallas, Felix had risen first to be a freedman and then to be governor. He was the first slave in history to ever become a governor of any Roman province. Tacitus, the Roman historian, said of him, he exercised the prerogatives of a king with the spirit of a slave. Isn't that interesting? He had actually been married to 3 princesses, one after another. The name of the first one is not known. The second was the granddaughter of Antony and Cleopatra. Okay? And the third was Drusilla, the daughter of Herod Agrippa I, who was one of Herod's sons. He was completely unscrupulous and capable of hiring thugs to murder his own closest supporters. And this was the man that Paul was going to be standing in front of in Caesarea. So this is a little bit dicey here. So keep in mind that the only reason this guy got his job was his brother was a favorite of Nero. Nero was never known to be a stable guy. So obviously, not only did he get dismissed from his post, but he got promoted. So he's there. So now he's saying, remember what he says, I want your accusers to show up. Turns out that Felix kind of knows what's going on, but Becky's right. He's trying to pass the buck on to somebody else. He's hoping that the accusers will make such a great case, he will just rule on it and he'll be done with it. Well, that's kind of what started out. Would somebody like to read Acts 24, 1 to 9?
I can do it. 5 days later, the high priest, Ananias, went down to Caesarea with some of the elders and lawyers named Tertullus. And they brought their charges against Paul before the governor. When Paul was called in, Tertullus presented his case before Felix. We have enjoyed a long period of peace under you, and your foresight has brought about reforms in this nation. Everywhere and in every way, most excellent Felix, we acknowledge this with profound gratitude. But in order not to worry you further, I would request that you be kind enough to hear us briefly. We have found this man to be troublemakers, stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. He is a ringleader of the Nazarene sect and even tried to desecrate the temple. So we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to learn the truth about all these charges we are bringing against him. The Jews joined in the accusation, asserting that these things were true.
Okay. In the version I've got, Tertullus was considered a pleader, but the more accurate term is he's a lawyer.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's their lawyer, and he's doing what all good lawyers do. He's stating the case, but he's kind of leaving a few things here and there out. Okay, it's a any of you ever see the original Caine Mutiny? The one with Jose Ferrer and Humphrey Bogart and whatnot. Well, in the Caine Mutiny, the ship is foundering, and the crew takes over and relieves the captain. So they're being charged with mutiny. So they hire Jose Ferrer to be their lawyer, and he goes through and he proves that the captain was a little unstable.
Nuts.
And then after it's all over, he said, "There's one thing." He comes a little bit, drunk, shall we say. He says, "There's one thing I keep reminding myself. There are certain parts of the case we didn't leave that I left out. Why? Because it wouldn't have helped our case any." That's what this guy's doing. He's leaving out parts that wouldn't help his case any, and he's how shall I say? He's making more of parts that will than actually happened. First of all, what is Tertullus doing when he starts his speech?
He's complimenting Felix.
He's kind of saying, "You're a great guy. We love you. We think you're fantastic." Remember, I described this guy, okay? But we love you anyway. We think you're great. We think you're we worship the ground you walk on. And since we do, why don't you let us take care of this pest that's about to be before you? We'll make him go away, and you'll love us even more. Gee whiz, sounds kind of like today, doesn't it? Anyway, so basically he then goes on and makes his case. So Tertullus began his speech with a passage of almost nauseating flattery, I guess you could say. Every word of which he and Felix knew was quite untrue. He went on to state things which were equally untrue. He claimed that the Jews had arrested Paul. The scene in the temple court was far closer to being a lynching than it was an arrest, which we have already seen. The charge he leveled against Paul was subtly inaccurate, and it was made up of 3 points. First, Paul is considered a stirrer, always in trouble, and, in this version, a pest. What was it your Bible called him?
Troublemaker.
A troublemaker. Okay, well they call him a pest in this one. He says, that classed Paul with those agitators who continually inflamed the easily excited populace into rebellion. Tertullus knew that there was only one thing that tolerant Rome would not stand, and that was civil disorder, for any spark might become a flame. Tertullus knew it was a lie, but he got Felix's attention. Then he says Paul was the leader of the sect of the Nazarenes. That coupled Paul with messianic movements, and the Romans knew what havoc false messiahs could cause and how they would whip the people into hysterical risings which were only settled at the cost of blood. Again, Tertullus knew that was a lie, but it was an effective charge, because Felix knew if that should happen, he'd lose his job. Then they said Paul was a defiler of the temple. The priests were Sadducees, the collaborationist party. To defile the temple was to infringe on the rights and laws of the priests and of the Romans. So the Sadducees wanted to do anything the Romans wanted. I mean, remember, they had a barracks right there in the temple there. Tertullus hoped, that Felix would take the side of the pro-Roman party. The charge was that most dangerous of things, a series of half-truths and twisted facts. So, there it is. Here is this guy, who's a professional lawyer, who's there in front of the governor who has much better things to do, I'm sure, and hearing all of this stuff. Okay? Again, this is all religious stuff, and Felix isn't really into that. So, now that Tertullus has done his whatever it is, Paul has been given the opportunity to state his defense. So would someone read Acts 24, 10 to 21?
I'll give it a try. When the governor motioned for him to speak, Paul replied, I know that you, for a number of years, you have been a judge over the nation, so I gladly make my defense. You can easily verify that no more than 12 days ago I went up to Jerusalem to worship. My accusers did not find me arguing with anyone at the temple or stirring up a crowd in the synagogues or anywhere else in the city. And they cannot prove to you the charges they are now making against me. However, I admit that I worship the God of our fathers as a follower of the way, which they call a sect. I believe everything that agrees with the law and that is written in the prophets, and I have the same hope in God as this man, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. So I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man. After an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem to bring my people gifts for the poor and to present offerings. I was ceremonially clean when they found me in the temple courts doing this. There was no crowd with me, nor was I involved in any disturbance. But there are some Jews from the province of Asia who ought to be here before you and bring charges if they have anything against me. Or these who are here should state what crime they found in me when I stood before the Sanhedrin, unless it was this one thing I shouted as I stood in the presence. It is concerning the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you today.
So you see what Paul is saying? Hey, none of this is truthful. And remember, he's also saying, what does he mean by the Jews of Asia?
Where he had formed churches before.
And they, remember, it was the Jews of Asia that supposedly were in the temple that saw him. Right? But that's right. They were all from all these other churches that he had founded. And they saw him as a true danger. Because, everywhere he went, he found converts that they couldn't find. Remember, there was one place, if you recall, he went to the synagogue, got thrown out of the synagogue, and went to the proconsul's house next door and converted his whole family. So, word like this gets around. But the point of the matter is, Paul is trying to set the record straight. Now, imagine, you're Felix. You hear this one side, and now you hear the other side, and you were never even there. So now, what do you think Felix is thinking?
He needs to do whatever he's got to do in his best interest.
Exactly. He's going to try to figure out, well, gee whiz, what should I do now? Because I don't want to fine for these people because, they that people that Paul's with might start a riot. I don't want to find for him, even though he's a Roman citizen, because they're going to start a riot. And if either one does, I lose my job. So I can't win either way. So he's got a different idea in mind. Would somebody read Acts 24, verses 22 to 27?
Alright, when Felix, who was well acquainted with the way, adjourned the proceedings. Then Lysias, the commander, comes. He said, I will decide your case. He ordered Centurion to keep Paul under guard, but to give him some freedom, and permit his friends to take care of his needs. Several days later, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was a Jewess. He sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Christ Jesus. As Paul discoursed on righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid and said, that's enough for now. You may leave. When I find it convenient, I will send for you. At the same time, he was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe, so he sent for him frequently and talked with him. When 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, but because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison.
What's going on here?
Well, sounds like somebody's being converted, maybe.
Yeah, well, actually, there's more to it than that. First of all, at the end, how long does it say Paul is going to be in prison under this guy?
2 years.
2 years.
Jeez.
This is here one case, 2 years. Okay, that's the important thing. Notice it also says, see, the Barclay version is a little bit kinder, but wouldn't surprise anybody when you hear that. When he says, at the same time he hoped that money would be given him by Paul, so he sent for him quite often and used to have conversation with him. So in other words, if Paul came up with the money, what do you think was going to happen?
He would have let him go, probably.
He would let him go. Now, with all those converts around, I think Paul would have gotten the money if he really wanted it. Obviously he didn't. But so stop and think. He's going to be, notice it says that he had some freedom. What that meant was he was under house arrest, he had a guard, and people were allowed to come and go. So he did some of his best writing when he was in prison there. Because, basically he didn't have much else to do. So if you look at, if you had that timeline from last week, and if you look at it when you get home, you'll see that there are a lot of letters that were written when Paul was in prison. And it lists them, what they are. So you'll see there, notice it says about, let's see, about 60 AD, it says Paul is in prison at Caesarea. And if you look down, you'll see that he wrote Colossians, Philemon, Ephesians, and Philippians while he was in prison. So, so he, again, remember I told you last week, Paul was great at taking advantage of every situation. So here he was, freedom, and not only that, but people were coming and going, so he had somebody who could deliver these things. So this is when Paul was really getting into his theology and whatnot. So again, Felix kept him there until the next guy came. And so again, Becky, you're right, they're passing the buck. They're just, so they're passing the buck, they're waiting until the next guy comes, and then maybe the next guy will figure out what to do with it.
When he was doing the writing, was he actually writing, or was he dictating?
Well, generally speaking, what would happen is that most of them would have what they would call a secretary. Because, paper was extremely expensive, and as a result, the secretary used, any of you ladies like to ever take shorthand?
I did for a short time, and it's hard.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
you got all the characters going together. Well, that's kind of the way they did stuff. It was like it was in shorthand. And, so there was a lot of, you had to know where all the capital letters were. You had to know where all the punctuations marks were. So it got kind of, wild when as time went on, trying to translate some of these things. But generally speaking, Paul had a secretary that would write these things. And Dr. Peel, who preached here, he actually has a section of Codex. I don't know where you got it. But you can see it's all characters going across. There's no spaces or anything. And it's all flat to each side. And that's what you use to read from and so on and so forth. So yes, he had a secretary more than likely. And also the fact that some of his sentences, if you study his books, there's sentences that he comes up with that are like 26 words long. And so people can't figure out whether he actually meant the sentence to be that long or the way the person wrote it came out to be that long, because he didn't want to write all the extra characters. So now he's been in prison for 2 years. He's been there for all this time, writing all these letters, and now a new guy comes along. So according to what Barclay says, he says, Felix was not unkind to Paul, but some of Paul's warning reminders struck terror in his heart. Remember he kept talking about faith? Well, his wife Drusilla was the daughter of Herod Agrippa I, and she had been married to, I hope I get this right, Azizus, that's Azizus, king of Emesa. But Felix, with the help of a magician called Adamos, had seduced her from Azizus and persuaded her to marry him. It was little wonder that when Paul presented him with the high moral demands of God, he's getting a little nervous here. Also, remember Herod's family was all nasty people. I mean, Herod killed a couple of his own sons because they were threats to him and things like that. So, for 2 years, Paul was in prison, and then Felix went too far once too often, and he got recalled. There was a long-standing argument as to whether Caesarea was a Jewish or a Greek city, and the Jews and Greeks were at daggers drawn. There was an outbreak of mob violence in which the Jews came off best. Felix dispatched his troops to aid the Gentiles. Thousands of Jews were killed, and the troops, with Felix's consent, ransacked and looted the houses of the wealthiest Jews in the city. The Jews did what the Roman provincials had a right to do. They reported their case to the governor in Rome. That is why Felix left Paul in prison, even though he was well aware that he should be set free. He was trying to curry favor with the Jews, but it was all to no avail. He was dismissed from his governorship, and only the influences of his brother Pallas saved him from execution. Things a little unstable there, don't you think? And here's Paul in the middle of all of this, sitting back and writing. So you get the idea now that the next guy coming in might want to have this person disappear. Because look what happened to the last guy. I'm going to let that happen to me. So I'm going to read what the Barclay version says. It says, 3 days after he had entered into his province, Festus, I guess it's the new guy, went up to Jerusalem. The chief priests and the chief men of the Jews laid information before him against Paul. They urged him, asking a favor against Paul, to send him to be brought to Jerusalem, for they were hatching a plot to murder him on the way. But Festus replied that Paul was under guard in Caesarea and that he himself would soon be leaving. So he said, let your men of power come down with me, and if there is anything amiss with the man, let them make their accusations. Didn't we do this already? So now he wants them to do it again. After spending no more than 8 or 10 days among them, when he had gone down to Caesarea, he took his place on the judgment seat and ordered Paul to be brought in. When Paul came in, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem surrounded him, and they leveled many serious accusations against him, which they were unable to prove. While Paul said in his defense, I have committed no crime either against the laws of the Jews or against the temple or against Caesar. But Festus, with the desire to ingratiate himself with the Jews, replied to Paul, are you willing to go to Jerusalem and in my presence to be tried on these charges? What do you think Paul had to say to that? How many think he would have said yes? How many think he would have said no? Well, he definitely said no. But Paul said, I am standing at Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be tried. I have committed no crime against the Jews, as you very well know, but I have committed some crime if I have done something which merits death. I am not trying to beg off myself by dying, but if there is nothing in the charges to which they accuse me, no one can hand me over as a favor to them. Then he says, I now appeal to Caesar. After Festus had conferred with his assessors, he said, you have appealed to Caesar you will go. So now what just happened? Good, out of my hair. No, it's your problem. So here's Paul having, basically a 2-year vacation, if you want to think, considering what he had been doing. And now he's going to go to Jerusalem. So you have to understand this part of it. Festus was very different from Felix. We know very little about him, but we do know that he was a just and upright man. He died only after 2 years in office, but he died with his reputation intact. That's interesting. The Jews tried to take advantage of him, and they tried to persuade him to send Paul to come to Jerusalem, for once again they had plotted to assassinate him. But Festus was a Roman, with the Roman instinct for justice, and he told them to come to Caesarea and plead their case there. From Paul's answer, we can deduce that the malicious charges which they leveled against him, they accused him of heresy, of sacrilege, and of treason. No doubt from their point of view, the first charge was true, irrelevant as it was to Roman law, but the second two were deliberate lies. Now, Festus had no desire to get on the wrong side of the Jews in the first days of his governorship, and he offered a compromise. Was Paul, he asked, prepared to go to Jerusalem and stand trial there while he stood by to make sure everything was okay? Well, the last time he was there, it was like, what, 70-1. I don't think him standing by would have mattered. But Paul knew that there was no such thing as fair play in Jerusalem, and he took to his great decision. Now, if Roman citizens felt they were not getting justice in a provincial court, they could appeal directly to the emperor. Only in the case of a murderer, a pirate, or a bandit caught in the act was the appeal invalid. So you can't be a murderer, a pirate, or someone being caught in the act of robbing somebody. Okay? Everything else can go there. In all other cases, the local procedure had to be halted and the claimant had to be dispatched to Rome for the personal decision of the emperor. Okay, so now stop and think. Knowing how big the Roman Empire was, how many cases do you think were on Nero's workload at about this time? I doubt if it was 1 or 2. So again, Paul is taking advantage of a situation. He knows that even if he gets to Rome, it's going to be a while before his case comes up on the docket. Unless there's a riot or something where Nero wants to move it up. When Paul uttered the fateful words, I appeal to Caesar, Festus had no choice, and so in Paul, in every different circumstances, from those to which he had dreamt, he had set his foot upon the first step on the road that led to Rome. So, that's 2 years now. Now he's going to Rome. The Jews are not happy. The governor is happy, because guess what? He's not my problem anymore. Good, he's out of here. So so then there's one other case here that I wanted to read to you about what happened next. When some days had elapsed, Agrippa the king and Bernice came to Caesarea to welcome Festus. As they were staying there for some time, Festus referred Paul's case to the king. There is a man, he said, who was left behind by Felix a prisoner. When I was in Jerusalem, the chief priests and elders of the Jews laid information before me concerning him and asked for his condemnation. I replied to them that it is not the custom of Romans to grant any man's life as a favor before the accused meets his accusers face to face and receives an opportunity to make his defense against the charge. So when they came down here, I made no delay, but on the next day I took my seat at the judgment seat and ordered the man to be brought in. The accusers rose and brought against him none of the accusations of crime which I was expecting. Keep that in mind, which I was expecting. But they had an argument with him on their own religion and about someone called Jesus, who is dead and whom Paul insists to be alive. I did not know what to make of the dispute about these matters, so I asked him if I was willing to go to Jerusalem and to be tried on these charges. But Paul appealed and demanded to be held for his majesty's investigation and his decision. So I ordered him to be held until I remand him to Caesar. So, here you hear about this Jesus. It sounds like the Romans, didn't even know who he was. But again, what's happening here is this is a religious matter, not a civil one. So remember what Paul said. He said, if there's some civil reason why you want to kill me, fine. But all I've heard from you people is a bunch of religious stuff, and this is what Festus is saying. Now, then Agrippa said to Festus, I too would like to hear the man. Tomorrow, he said, you will hear him. So on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with much pomp. And when they had come into the audience chamber with the captains and the leading men of the city, Paul was brought in. So Festus said, King Agrippa and all who are here present with us, you see this man concerning whom the whole community of the Jews kept petitioning me, both in Jerusalem and here, crying out that he ought not to be allowed to live any longer. I understood he has done nothing to merit death. But when this man himself approached to his majesty, I gave judgment to send him. I have nothing definite to write to my lord about him. So I brought him in you, especially before you, King Agrippa, so that when your investigation has been made, I'll have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner and not to send the charges against him. What's he doing now?
Sounds like trying to collect evidence.
Well, he's passed it on to the next guy.
Another person. That's all he does.
Why couldn't the initial encounters, using Paul decided he wanted to go to Rome, why couldn't they take him directly to Rome, meaning, I know it's a long way.
Yeah, right.
Why did he have to go through all that business with the Sanhedrin at each stop? Why couldn't the army just keep him captive and move on?
Well, they could have, but here's what was going on. He was trying to do the same thing Pilate was trying to do. Remember, when Pilate wanted to get Jesus out of his purvey, if you will, what did Pilate do?
Wash his hands.
Wash his hands of them.
Well, before he did that, he did something else. Remember, he offered somebody.
prisoners.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's thinking that, well, if they take Barabbas, what I'm expecting they're gonna do, I'm off the hook. Didn't happen. So, what he was trying to do was come up with a way for Jesus' case to be resolved so he wouldn't have to do anything. Didn't work out that way. So now Pilate washes his hands of the whole thing, saying, hey, you know, I'm not, ain't me. You know, that way if there is a God, he ain't gonna punish me. I didn't do it. Well, that's what this guy's trying to do. He's saying, I don't know what to say to the next level up. Because I gotta he's gotta have a letter explaining why he's coming before the court here. So, you, king, you know, you're my boss. Why don't you give me some ideas here? You know, I don't know what to do. I can't send him without anything, and I don't have anything good to write down. So that's why he goes to the king and says, here, tell me what to write, okay? Here, I'm ready. And so, in fact, he passes him on to the next person. So now Paul has been passed from Felix to Festus to the king. So now what's the king going to do? The king is going to have some interesting stuff. First of all, Agrippa was still king of quite a small part of Palestine, which included Galilee and Perea. But he knew quite well that he owed his position, even in that limited realm, to the Romans. They could put him there, and they could easily remove him. It was therefore his custom to pay a courtesy visit to the Roman governor whenever he entered the province. So now you understand. Now here's what Acts 25, 22 to 27 says. Agrippa said to Festus, I too would like to hear the man. Tomorrow you will hear him. And then we went through that whole thing. Then in Acts 26, Agrippa says to Paul, you have permission to speak on your own behalf. And Paul stretched out his hand and began his defense. With regard to the charges made against me by the Jews, King Agrippa, I count myself fortunate to state my defense before you, especially because you're an expert in all Jewish customs and questions. Key point here, folks. Therefore I ask you to give me a patient hearing. All the Jews know my way of life from my youth, from which the beginning I lived among my people in Jerusalem. They all know me from old, and if they are willing to testify to it, I lived as a Pharisee according to the strictest code of our religion. And now it is for the hope of the promise that was made to our fathers that I stand on trial, that hope to which our 12 tribes hope to attain, earnestly worshiping God day and night. It is for that hope, your majesty, I am accused. Why should you judge it to be incredible if God raises the dead? It is true that I myself thought it right to do many things in opposition to the name of Jesus of Nazareth, and this I did. When I received authority from the chief priests, I shut up many of the saints in prison, and when they were executed, I gave my vote against them. Often throughout the synagogues, I took vengeance on them, and I tried to force them to blaspheme. In my insane fury against them, I have even extended this persecution of them to the cities abroad. As we leave, keep this in mind. Now Paul's talking to somebody who isn't Roman. He's Jewish. Remember, he was the king of a Jewish area, and that's what the Romans did. They always put, people like Herod in charge that were locals. So he's saying, now you know all about what I'm talking about. You understand when I say I'm a Pharisee. He knows that Festus doesn't have the foggiest idea. So that's where we're going to leave it. So now he's one more level up. And now Agrippa's got to figure out, now what am I supposed to do? Because if I screw this up, they're gonna take me from my job, and I kind of like where I'm living. Also, I kind of like the perks. So I can't really do that. But at the same time, if I don't listen to the guy, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to listen to the guy. remember, he's only there by accident. But Festus knew he was there, and that's, you know, that's now, again, one last thing. What did Pilate do when Jesus was brought before him? What's the first thing he did?
Send him a Herod.
Send him to Herod. That's what this guy's doing. He's sending him to the equivalent of Herod. Hoping that the king will say, well, you know, you violate all kinds of rules, you know, somebody do something about this guy. And, well, if you recall, Herod didn't exactly do much of anything, other than, you know, make him try to make miracles and stuff. But that's what he did. So you see, this whole thing about Paul's happening to him, what happened to Jesus is playing out. The only difference is they had to do something right away with Jesus because the riots were going on in the city. In this case, things have calmed down. So keep in mind, when he goes to Rome, he's there because of a civil matter, not a religious one. And if you recall, Nero didn't exactly like Christians anyway. So that's for next week, and we'll be able to put the tape in, and we'll be able to see the voyage he takes. And you will find that getting to Rome was not as easy as every one of you might think. There were a few things that happened along the way that were, shall we say, quite a bit unusual, and in some cases nasty. You're going to find that there's some weather problems, and people got sick, and all kinds of other strange things. So Paul did not exactly go to Rome by the fastest way possible. And as a result, he did some things along the way, too. There's a few people I would like to have had lunch with. This is one of them. I just would love to have lunch to find out what the heck was in this guy's mind. When you stop to think about it. It would have been fascinating. One question, what possessed you? To do what he's doing. So far, he hasn't been exactly having a barrel of fun, but he's getting the job done, and that's why we need to respect the guy. Oh well, it's 10 minutes to. It's time for church. We'll see what's going on.